I'm talking today with Professor Katharine McKinnon from the University of Canberra, who's the lead researcher on Activity 4 for the project. So Katharine, could you briefly just give us a description of what is Activity 4?
So Activity 4 is kind of in the midpoint of the project, and it's the stage where we start to bring in some community economies analysis around household livelihoods. The purpose of that, there's a few layers to it. So one is to get a picture of the diverse economic practices that make up a household's livelihood. So that means taking into account not just the ways in which they might earn a cash income, whether that's through wage labour off the farm or through selling produce, but also income from produce that they would consume themselves, and also all the other kind of work that is required to enable a livelihood. So that's work of care within the family, of cooking and cleaning, of maintaining relationships and social or religious obligations in the community. So the full sort of gamut of economic activities, from formal economy, informal economy, to the social economy as well. So we want a broad picture of that network of economic relationships that people create a livelihood within. And then we also want to understand that for people in the household, which of those are the ones that they value? Which of those are giving them a good life? And what does that mean? So what does a good life mean to people? What are the economic activities that they see as being important ways to live that good life and to have really broad well-being? And which of those are detracting? So certain activities that might require a lot of very intensive labour input for very little economic or social return might be something that, for example, is actually detracting from household well-being rather than fostering it or making it flourish. And when we have that mutual understanding of what is really contributing to your well-being, what is making this a good life for you, that will be the foundation then for the work that we go on to in the project, where we are designing key interventions with households and seeing different approaches to agricultural extension, what kind of impacts those can have when they're really targeting to what farmers want, what farmers feel is important, and the complex economic relations that their livelihoods are positioned within.
Interesting. And at what phase is your activity at the moment?
The fieldwork that I'll be running for it is coming up in the next 6 to 10 months. But the work that has already been going on in the project is already starting to fill out some of that foundational picture of diverse economic activities. So we've got some data coming in from the census that was led in Activity 2 so that we can start developing that picture of diverse economic practices as the foundation. But really we're kind of beginning to get some formative learnings around that and doing a lot of reflection on what we've learned so far in the project and how that might shape the methods that we actually end up using in the field when we go ahead with this. The idea with Activity 4 is that it's a space in which we want to work with groups in the community and run more of a workshop participatory format. So understanding who the community is and what the kind of social and political dynamics are within those communities is shaping how that might unfold.
And what have you learned from the project over the last 12 months, which is influencing that sort of design phase?
Yeah, there's a few things. So from Activity 1, which is the series of interviews with experts in this field of agricultural extension, that has, I feel, really verified for me the impetus of this project altogether in terms of the challenges of professional engagement with farmers and how you do agricultural extension. There's a way of doing extension work which is still very much situated within a rather old idea of technology transfer. You know, my own research in Southeast Asia has shown the problems with that approach for many decades in the past. So my learning from those interviews is really learning that so little has changed in how rural development and agricultural development is done on the ground. When I was last engaged in the field in this part of the world, it was very clear that the old way of doing extension, this focus on technology transfer, wasn't working particularly well. Coming back again into this area of work and seeing what the experts are saying now about how things are done, not a lot has changed, which is a real conundrum. Why hasn't it changed? We have a depth of empirical evidence about what doesn't work in agricultural extension and rural development. So why are the institutions and the funding agencies so unable to make the changes that need to happen? In the last wee while of the project, that's been a really big part of what I've been learning, but also recently with the emergent data from the census that we've been running is another big thing which is feeding into how my activity will go, is looking at the population profile, for example, of these communities that shows so clearly the impact of the Khmer Rouge era with this dip in population for people in their 40s and 50s, but also, of course, the massive dip around people in their 20s, which is showing this rate of outmigration of young people from those communities, which again is a depth of insight into how disrupted these communities must be and the impacts of the Khmer Rouge era, certainly, and the sort of ongoing impacts of being in a post-conflict environment, but also this real stage of life gap in many of the communities where there's so much absence. So those are really tricky social and political dynamics to work with. And for the kind of participatory workshops that I'm intending to run, I'm working a lot now to learn about how to do that well in a post-conflict environment and in environments, because a lot of the participatory methods have as a base assumption this idea that there is a cohesive community that you are working with. It's a village that's been here for generations, you know. I'm increasingly aware that that is not a good assumption to be making in many places, but particularly here in northwest Cambodia. So doing a lot of work to think about how to do participatory engagement well in these kinds of difficult situations.
Really interesting. So what are you planning for the next 12 months?
You know, at the moment I'm working through the Activity 1 interviews with trying to puzzle out this question of why change hasn't happened in practice. So that's a paper that I'm working on and really wanting to bring the team into as we move forward. There's a lot of work that will be happening over the next few months to pull out the contributions from the census that flesh out this vision of diverse economic activities in the communities, and will give a really important kind of foundational view before we start planning that set of activities. And then also, because Activity 3 will be designed and running over the next few months, and from that activity that will also be filling in some of the important foundational information for Activity 4. So if that work is wanting to map what is the farm and what are the networks and relationships that make up the operation of a farm, that will also allow this vision of the diverse economic practices to be deepened and broadened from the data that comes in from Activity 3. So there's a lot of data analysis from the activities that have already been completed or are about to run, and then a lot of planning and design work for the workshops that I'm going to be running in each of the communities that we're working with. We'll probably have 1 or 2 workshops with selected participants from those communities to have some of those focus group discussions and those activities together. The timing of those is going to be towards the end of the year, so there's a lot of preparation at the moment.
And finally, what are you hoping to find out from Activity 4?
So I think by the time we've completed the set of activities, the workshops associated with Activity 4, what I'm hoping to have is a broad map of the diverse economic activities that households in northwest Cambodia engage in. Along with the data from activities 2 and 3, we should have a whole picture of a livelihood ecology for households in this region. So what are the complex ways in which your livelihood is put together, and what does that mean? So because we have this wonderful depth of data from the census, we should be able to look at households and understand, so in this household, your diverse economic practices look like this, this sort of massive network of activities. What are the characteristics that we associated with that big diversity versus a household that perhaps is only reliant on a smaller set of activities? What are the differences in terms of the household's wealth status, what kind of assets they might have, how strong or how vulnerable that household is, economically speaking? Is there a correlation between the breadth of activities you're involved in, your household well-being, how well off you are? Is it a positive or a negative correlation? So being able to do some of that analysis is really something that we haven't been able to do before in the field of community economies or diverse economies. So we'll have this understanding of what it looks like between the diversity of economic activities and household well-being on a broad level. What we'll also have is a vision into what household well-being looks like, not just according to kind of standard external parameters, but according to what local people really value and feel is important in their own lives. And so that we'll have a picture of, what is the good life here and for you in this context, and what is it that enables you to have that good life? What are the specificities that belong to this cultural, social, political context? And what are the specificities of that experience for men or for women or for young people or for older people? So being able to have that, the sense of the complexity and the nuance in the community will be important. And finally, and really importantly, we will in that process be identifying some key avenues for interventions that the project will then go on to run and to test and to see what the impacts of those are. Extension work based on what farmers want and what they value and feel is important, and based on what farmers feel is important, not what an external party might assume is important.
Really interesting. Thank you so much for your time today, Katharine.
Thank you.